Welcome back. All right, so first off, the jersey I'm wearing I got off eBay, used, not that long ago. I have not worn it in a video before. It is a starter fashion jersey, where basically they made jerseys that were colors for teams that they never actually wore. I have various jerseys from teams that I've worn over the years that are fashion jerseys from starter, and I'm hoping Fanatics brings that back. I think it would be great. Now, what you see on the board is 7 years of tracking power rankings. And so this is using the same data that we used last year for the average power rankings per team over the entire time I've done power rankings. That, of course, was posted while we were down in Disney. But it was fun. It was a fun countdown to do, and I really enjoyed doing that. And so I had a different idea. And my wife helped compile the data that's on the board before you, tracking where a team starts the season on the power rankings and where it ends. Now, the power rankings I've not always done the same. Sometimes I waited until the third week of the season before I started doing power rankings. There were times where I would do the power rankings in a highly reactive way. So if a team won or lost, they automatically moved up or they moved down. I had no opinion on the matter, and that created chaos. So not all of these power rankings were done the same. But I've got my handy notebook here. I'm going to go ahead and do timestamps because this video could take a while. And as I was putting this together last night, I was going to post this last night, and I thought, no, this could take a bit. I want to make sure I got some time. And so instead, I watched some Love is Blind last night. So that being said, let's go ahead and start things off. We'll start off with Anaheim because that's the top of the board here. So 2017-2018, they started 17th on the power rankings. They ended up 9th. They were out in the first round that year. And that was the first year that I did power rankings. 2016-2017 was the first season where I had the channel and we were following, daily videos on what was going on in the NHL. But I did not do regular power rankings until 2017-2018. 2018-2019, they started the season 12th. They ended the season 24th. So I was more optimistic at the start than I ended up being at the end. 2019-2020, we were into the dark days for Anaheim at this point. The highest, they started the season 20th. They ended up 26th. 2020-2021, they started the season 30th on the power rankings. They ended up 27th. 2021-2022, they started the season 26th. They ended up 27th, so virtually no movement. And then it gets more depressing from here. 2022-2023, they started the season 26th. They ended up dead last, 32nd. And this past season, they started the season in last, and they ended the season in last. And currently on the board, they are, they're 28th currently. So that's not bad, right? It's not bad at all. But for the Anaheim Ducks, it's been kind of a quiet time since the last time they made the playoffs. But outside of 2018, when I started them in 12th, I haven't started them in a top 16 spot since then. I'm hoping that changes soon. All right, next up, Calgary. 2017-2018, they started the season 13th on the board. They ended up 25th. So they dropped off after being in the top 16. 2018-2019, they started 18th on the board. They ended up second by the end of the year. They did go out in the first round that season. 2019-2020, they started the season 8th on the board. They ended up 12th on the board, and they were out in the first round that year as well. 2020-2021, they started the season 14th on the board. They ended up 23rd by the end of it. That was the Canadian Division season. 2021-2022, they started the season 17th on the board. They ended the season 5th. They were out in round 2 that year. 2022-2023, they started the season 5th on the board. They ended the season in 20th. And this past season, they started the season in 17th. They ended up in 26th. So with the Calgary Flames, twice I had them outside of a playoff spot that they made it into a playoff spot eventually, and that's after that first power rankings. And then there's a year where they start 8th and they end up 12th. So pretty consistent that season, and not too much of a difference between the start and the finish. But they're very unpredictable. 3 times they've started the season in the top 16 and ended up missing the playoffs, and twice they started the season outside the top 16 and ended up in the playoffs. So yeah, Calgary can be very hard to predict. So moving along, the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers started with 17-18. They started 20th on the board that year. They ended up 23rd at the end. 2018-2019, barely any change. They started the season 25th. They ended the season 26th. 2019-2020, we see them jump. They go from 22nd on the first power rankings of the season to 7th, but they lost in the qualifying round that year against the Chicago Blackhawks. 2020-2021, they started the season 22nd on the board. They ended up 10th. So that's twice that I had them 22nd, and they jump right up. I didn't make that mistake again. 2021-2022, they start the season 2nd. They end up 10th by the end of the season. They lost in the conference final that year. 2022-2023, they start the season 6th on the board. They end up 2nd at the end of the year. They were out in the second round. And what's interesting is this past season, they started the season 12th. They ended up 6th at the end of the year, which completely glosses over that terrible start and how low they got on the board. And of course, they ended up going to the Stanley Cup final in 2024. So 5 years in a row, we've seen the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs. 5 years in a row, they've ended the season in the top 10 on the power rankings. That's a pretty good run. That is a pretty good run for the Edmonton Oilers. Now it's just adding a cup ring to that pretty good run. And then, you've got yourself something. All right, the LA Kings. For the Kings, they started the season 7th in 2017-2018 and ended the season 14th. They were out in the first round that year. That was the playoffs where Jonathan Quick played absolutely fantastic. Fleury was just that little bit better at the other end, and they got swept. Absolutely insane series. 2018-2019, they start the season 19th on the board. They ended up 27th at the end of it. 2019-2020, they started the season 28th. They ended up 18th, so they did move up, but not into the top 16. 2020-2021, they started the season 27th. They ended up 30th. So that was a rough year. And then things start to get better. 2021-2022, they start the season in 28th. They ended up 12th at the end of the season. 2022-2023, they start the season 23rd on the board. They ended up 10th at the end of the season. And this past season, they started the season 11th on the board, and they ended 13th. So that's twice that they jump up into the top 12 when they're in the 20s to start the season. And, of course, they've lost in the first round 3 years in a row. And they've lost 4 times in the first round in the 7 seasons on the board. The other 3 seasons, of course, they missed the playoffs. So playoff success has been fleeting, but for the LA Kings, 13th. And right now on the board, they're not in the top 16, but I think they probably get back there. I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't. All right. San Jose. The Sharks, things start out pretty well. They started in 2017, 2018, and 26th, ended up 12th at the end of the season. 2018, 2019, they start the season in 11th. They end up in 15th. So they go to the second round in 2018, lose against Vegas, and then they beat Vegas in 2019. No controversy there. They go all the way to the conference final. Again, no controversy getting there. 2019, 2020, it's been 5 years. We can let that go. They start the season 24th in 2019, 2020. They end the season 29th. 2020, 2021, very consistent. They start the season 24th. They end 25th. 2021, 2022, they start the season in 11th. I believe that was when they had the early Canada swing where they were beating Canadian teams, but they end up 25th at the end of the season. 2022, 2023, they start the season in 31st. They end up in 30th. And this past season, they started the season 31st, and they ended the season 31st. And currently, they are 32nd on the board. So, yeah. For San Jose, it's been a tough go of it recently. Seattle. So for Seattle, we just have 2 years to go with. And 2021, 2022, they started 29th on the board. They ended up 26th at the end of the season. Their second season in the league, 2022, 2023, they started 21st. They ended up 13th at the end of the season. They lost in the second round. And this past season, they started 24th on the board. They ended up 28th. So Seattle, currently higher than that 28th, higher than the 24th as well. So they're higher than all that, although I'm sure Seattle fans will say they're not high enough on the board. But gradual movement is usually the way to go, usually the way to go with the power rankings. But that's a whole other other discussion for another time. All right. Vancouver. So 2017, 2018, they started the season 29th. They ended up 22nd. Oh, there's a lot of rough years here. 2018, 2019, they started the year 24th. They ended up 22nd. 2019, 2020 was an interesting year. They started 29th on the board. The last power rankings I did at the pause, they were 22nd. They were not doing well. Markstrom was hurt. With Demko in net, they weren't playing as well, and I felt like they were trending towards missing the playoffs. However, the NHL hits the pause button. By the time we come back in August, Vancouver was playing better, and they end up going to the second round, but still, they were 22nd in the last power rankings I did. 2020, 2021, they started the season 29th. They ended up 31st. So, rough year. 2021, 2022, they started the season 22nd. They ended up 17th on the board. 2022, 2023, they started the season 25th. They ended the season 22nd. So it has been an ugly run for the Vancouver Canucks on the power rankings board until this past season. They started 10th on the board. They ended up 11th, and they got into the second round this past season. And they started the season in the top 16 this year. So that's the second time in a row that Vancouver started in the top 16. We'll see how everything goes. But man, those 6 years, it's something. So yeah, Vancouver, not a great run, but at least they're starting on. It looks like at least that they're starting a good run, right? They're not going to fall back, right? Now that they've got it together, and that's a whole other discussion, right? Okay, so Vegas. Vegas came into the league with no expectations. They started the season 22nd on the board. They ended up 15th at the end of the year. They got all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Then 2018, 2019, they start the season 16th on the board. They ended up 10th at the end of the season. They were out in the first round against San Jose. 2019, 2020, they start the season third on the board. They end the season third on the board, and they go to the conference final. 2020, 2021, they started the season second on the board. They ended the season first on the board. So strong run in 2021. 2021, 2022, they started the season 19th on the board. They ended the season 18th, and that is the 1 year that they've missed the playoffs in their existence. 2022, 2023, they started the season 11th on the board. They ended the season 4th, won the Stanley Cup there. 2023, 2024, they started the season in first because they're the Cup winners. They ended up 15th. And, of course, they were knocked out in the first round that season. So, for Vegas, they trended in the wrong direction last year. They're trying to turn that around this year, and they've looked pretty good so far, even though their record not necessarily great. But, again, it's a tough road trip when you go back east, so I always keep that in mind. Because, yeah, those East Coast road swings have been tough for teams. So, now we go into the Central Division. And Arizona, because Utah hasn't actually had a season as Utah yet. They're just starting their first. So, Arizona, 2017-2018, they started the season 31st. They ended the season 19th. And then one of those ones that maybe do a double take. They had the exact same path the next season. They start the season 31st. They end up 19th. Slow starts were terrible for Arizona and submarine their chances of making to the playoffs. They actually played pretty well late in the season. That's why they would climb. 2019-2020 is no different. They start the season 25th. They end up 19th. Because of the expanded playoffs, they make it. They get out of the qualifying round. They get eliminated in the first round that year. 2020-2021, they start the season 24th on the board, or 20th on the board, and they end up 24th. 2021-2022, and the rebuild. They start the season 32nd on the board. They end up 30th at the end of the season. Then the following season, they start the season 32nd on the board. They end up 28th at the end of the season. And then this past season, the last one in Arizona, they started the season 21st on the board, and they ended up 27th by the end of it. So just not a great run here for the Coyotes. And remember, this is bubble playoffs. Arizona didn't see playoffs for the entire 7 years on this board. Not in their home building, they didn't. And that's a big part of the reason why I think that they had trouble with everything, with fan support, with getting an arena, everything. The team's successful, it'll be supported, and I think it puts a little more pressure on government officials. But because Arizona hadn't been great on or off the ice in a long time, it's much easier to say, no, we're not going to do that. So, at any rate, yeah, that ends out the Arizona chapter for today. Chicago. So, 2017-2018, I had them first going into that season. I know they got swept in the first round by Nashville in 2017, but I thought, they're going to come back angry. They didn't. They ended up 27th by the end of that season. 2018-2019, they start the season 17th on the board. They ended up 18th at the end of it. 2019-2020, they started the season 23rd on the board, and then at the time of the pause, they were 25th on the board. They were knocked out in the first round that year. They did eliminate Edmonton in the qualifying round. 2020-2021, they start the season 31st on the board. They ended up 20th, so they did move up by the end. 2021-2022, they start the season 31st. They end up 29th. The following season, they start the season 28th. They end up 29th at the end of the season. And this past year, they start 30th. They end 30th. Those bottom three teams in the West, San Jose, Anaheim, Chicago, no matter what order you look at them in, they've been down in the dumps for a few years now. So that's part of the reason why I'm rooting for at least one of them to get out of the bottom, because it does get kind of boring seeing the same teams at the bottom every year. I can imagine if you're rooting for one of those teams too, probably gets kind of boring as well. All right, column 2, and we get to the Colorado Avalanche. 2017-2018, they started the season 19th on the board. They ended up 16th at the end of it. They got knocked out in the first round. Playoffs every year on the board for Colorado. 2018-2019, they start the season 8th. They end up 16th at the end of it. 2019-2020, they start the season 6th on the board. They end up 4th at the end of it. Out in the second round both those years there after that first round knockout. 2020-2021, they start the season 4th. They end up 5th at the end of it. They're out in the second round. 2021-2022, they start the season 10th on the board. They ended the season 2nd on the board and won the Stanley Cup. Keep in mind, I don't do power rankings during the playoffs. I tried the one time and it kind of came off silly. 2022-2023, they start the season 2nd on the board. They ended up 3rd on the board at the end of it, and they were out in the first round. This past season, they started the season 4th on the board. They ended up 8th at the end of it, and they're out in the second round. So playoffs every year for Colorado. They got a Stanley Cup in 2022. I think they're going to get another. It's just a matter of when. But I'd be very surprised if they don't end up at least getting one more Stanley Cup. All right, Dallas. Dallas has had a very up and down run. So 2017-2018, they start the season 18th on the board. They end up 21st at the end of it. 2018-2019, they start the season 7th on the board. They end up 13th at the end of it. They were out in the second round. 2019-2020, they start the season 15th on the board. They ended the season 16th on the board and went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Coming out of that pause, they were pretty good come playoff time. Hudobin gets full respect. 2020-2021, they start the season 13th on the board and ended the season 17th. Just couldn't stop losing in overtime and shootouts. Couldn't get that extra point. 2021-2022, they start the season 12th on the board. They ended up 15th, and they were out in the first round. 2022-2023, they start the season 10th on the board. They end up 8th at the end of it, and they're out in the conference final. Conference final this past year as well, where they started the season 5th on the board, and they ended up 3rd at the end of it. So it's been a steady climb for them, honestly, since this season here where they missed the playoffs. 15th, 8th, and 3rd. So just looking at it that way, it's part of the reason why Dallas would be my pick for the Stanley Cup this year. It really has nothing to do with who I do or don't root for. So I'd like to see Dallas win a Stanley Cup. I think they have the personnel necessary. It's just a matter of getting hot at the right time. So Minnesota, 2017-2018, they started the season 24th on the board. They ended it in 6th. They were out in the first round that year. 2018-2019, they start the season 21st on the board. They ended up 20th at the end of it, so not much movement there. 2019-2020, they start the season 30th on the board. They ended up 15th at the end of it. They lost in that qualifying round series against Vancouver. 2020-2021, they start the season 8th on the board. They ended up 7th at the end of it, but they were out in the first round, which has been a problem for Minnesota for some time now. We're up to about a decade since they won a round. 2021-2022, they start the season 5th on the board. They ended up 6th at the end, out in the first round again. 2022-2023, they start 17th on the board. They end up 11th at the end of it, and out in the first round again. And then this past season, they started 16th on the board. They were 22nd at the end of it. So Minnesota has had middling results in the playoffs. They've had some good runs in the regular season during the time of the channel, just then playoff time rolls around and they're out. Which is definitely an issue for them. Speaking of which, Nashville's had that problem too since their Stanley Cup final run in 2017. So 2017-2018, they start the season 14th on the board. They were 2nd at the end of the season. They were out in the second round. 2018-2019, they start the season second on the board. They were ninth at the end of it, out in the first round. 2019-2020, they start the season ninth on the board. They were sixth at the end. They lose in the qualifying round against Arizona that year. 2020-2021, they start the season 18th on the board. They ended up 12th at the end, and they were out in the first round. 2021-2022, they start the season 27th on the board. They end up 16th at the end. They're out in the first round again. 2022-2023, they start the season 14th on the board, and they're 18th at the end. This past season, they started 25th. They ended up 12th. They're out in the first round. And this year, it looks like it could be the other way around. They start high on the board, and man, if they don't turn around this slow start, it could be a really, really rough season for them. But as you can see, they recovered from a slow start last year, so maybe they'll be able to do it this year as well. Every year is different, though. There's no guarantee of a comeback just because it was done the year before. All right, next up, St. Louis. 2017-2018, they started the season 9th on the board. They were 18th at the end of it. 2018-2019, they start the season 15th on the board, move up to 5th at the end of it, and they win a Stanley Cup. So again, in the middle there's a dip. They have a huge run there where they're low on the board. They were never at the bottom of the power rankings, though. I know they were at the bottom of the standings, but I never had them at the bottom of the power rankings. They make a coaching change. Things work pretty well. Binnington ends up playing, and they win a Stanley Cup. 2019-2020, they started the season 4th on the board. They were 5th at the end of it, and they were out in the first round. 2020-2021, they were out in the first round again. They started the season 6th on the board. They ended up 13th at the end of it. 2021-2022, they started the season 4th on the board. They ended up 7th at the end of it, and they were out in the second round. 2022-2023, I had them 8th on that first power rankings. They were 23rd on the one to end out the season. And this past season, they started 26th on the board. They were 19th at the end of the season. And of course, this year, it looks like they might be ready to return to the playoffs. So that'll be the first time in a few years that that's happened. And we'll see if that is, in fact, the case in April. We'll know whether or not they made the playoffs. Then we can look back on this and say, oh, there we go. But of course, I don't have where they've started this season on the board, because we don't have an endpoint to put on the board or any of the other stats that I'm putting on either. All right, Winnipeg, 2017-2018, they started the season 8th on the board. They were 1st in the last power rankings I did that season. They end up going all the way to the conference final, and they lose there against Vegas. 2018-2019, they started the season 5th on the power rankings board. They were 12th at the end. They were out in the first round. 2019-2020, they started 16th on the board. They were 9th at the end of it. They were out in the qualifying round that year against Calgary. 2020-2021, they start the season in 11th on the power rankings board. They were 16th at the end and out in the second round. 2021-2022, they started the season 18th, and very tidy result. They were 19th at the end of the season. 2022-2023, they started the season 16th on the board. They were 14th at the end and out in the first round. And this past season, they started the season 15th on the board. They were 5th at the end of the season. And again, a first-round exit. So since that conference final in 2018, there hasn't been a lot of happiness in Winnipeg come playoff time, something they're looking to turn around. So let's get into the Eastern Conference, shall we? Starting with the Boston Bruins. 2017-2018, they start the season 15th on the board. They're 4th at the end of it. So round 2 is where they end up that year. The following season, 2018-2019, they start the season 4th, they end the season 4th, and they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. 2019-2020, they started the season 2nd on the board, they ended the season 2nd on the board, and they went out in the second round. 2020-2021, they start the season 10th on the board, they end the season 8th on the board, and they were out in the second round as well. 2021-2022, they start the season 9th on the board, they end the season 11th on the board. This time they're out in the first round. 2022-2023, they start the season 13th on the board. They end the season 1st, and they're out in the first round. 2023-2024, they start the season 7th on the board. They ended the season 4th on the board, and they were out in the second round that year. So Stanley Cup final in 2019. Other than that, there's been some frustration in Boston come playoff time. Just a little bit. But in Buffalo, they love some kind of playoff frustration, playoff anything. And this might be the most depressing run on the board because, I mean, Arizona got in 2020. 2017-2018, the Buffalo Sabres start 30th on the board. They ended the season 26th. The following season, 2018-2019, they start the season 20th. They ended up 31st. 2019-2020, they start the season 14th. Here we go, good strong start, and they end the season in 30th. 2020-2021, they start the season 28th. They ended the season in 29th, so that's not encouraging. 2021-2022, they start the season 24th, and they end up 22nd at the end of the year. 2022-2023, they start the season in 18th. They end the season in 17th. That's about as close as you get for Buffalo. And then this past season, they started the season in 23rd, and they ended the season in 20th. So for Buffalo, it's been a rough go since 2011, and the start to this season hasn't been that encouraging either. But maybe it'll turn around. I mean, I'm wearing Buffalo, right? I'm doing what I can. I'm doing what I can to help. But yeah, Buffalo, they could use a little bit of help. All right, Detroit, 2017-2018, they started the season 10th on the board. They were 28th at the end of the season. 2018-2019, they start the season 30th. They end up 25th at the end of it. 2019-2020, they were 27th to start, 31st at the end of it. Remember, this is a 31-team league until Seattle comes in. 2020-2021, they're 26th on the board to start. They end up 22nd. 2021-2022, they start 23rd. They end up 24th on the board. So not much movement there. Then 2022-2023, they started the season at 15th. I was optimistic, and they ended the season in 27th. This past season, this is an aberration. This is the only time this happens on the board. They start the season in 13th. They ended the season in 16th. I actually had them ahead of the Philadelphia Flyers at the end of the season, even though Flyers were close to them. And I had them ahead of the Capitals, who ended up making the playoffs instead of Detroit. So they were all around each other. And then I'm thinking, too, like, no, Buffalo didn't almost make it this past season. And Ottawa slid towards the end. So, yeah, it was kind of a rough finish to the season for Detroit fans. But again, I had them in 16th. I felt like they were playing well enough to be in the playoffs. All right, Florida. Florida, 2017-2018, 23rd start the season, 17th to finish the season. 2018-2019, they start the season 28th. They ended up 21st at the end of the season. 2019-2020, they started the season 10th. They ended up 23rd at the end of it. And they were out in the qualifying round against the Islanders. That was a rough series to watch, and that was kind of where I said, well, I don't know this Florida Panthers team's ever going to win anything. What a rough series. But anyways, they did. We know that. Spoiler alert. 2020-2021, they started the season 17th on the board. They were 6th at the end of it. 2021-2022, they start the season first, they end the season first, and they went out in the second round. The first time they'd won a series since their Stanley Cup final run in 1996. 2022-2023, they start the season first on the board. They were 12th at the end of the season, but they still went all the way to the final. And then this past season, they started the year 22nd on the board. They ended up 10th at the end of it, and a Stanley Cup win for the Florida Panthers. So pretty good, pretty strong run there for Florida. Recently, at least, second round Stanley Cup final, Stanley Cup. So they're going to win the cup again this year. We'll find out soon enough. But yeah, Florida, Montreal. Montreal 2017-2018. They start 27th. They end up 30th at the end of the season. 2018-2019. They start 27th. They end up 17th at the end of the season. 2019-2020. They start the season 13th on the board. They end up 17th at the end of it. And they lost in the first round, but they made the playoffs because of the expanded playoffs and knocking out Pittsburgh in the qualifying round. 2020-2021, they started the season third. They ended up 19th at the end. They weren't playing well going into the playoffs, and they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final because you just got to get hot at the right time. But the following seasons where the rebuild gets going, minus Weber and Price, 2021-2022, they start the season 30th on the board. They're 31st at the end of it. The year after that, they start the season 27th on the board. They were 26th at the end of that season. And the season that we just finished in June, I guess, with the awarding of the Stanley Cup, you can say that would be the end of the season. Their season ended in April. 28th is where they started on the board. They ended up 25th by the end of the season. So it's been a rough 3 years for Montreal. We're going to see how year 4 is going to go. But at the time I'm recording this, they are 2-3-1 to start the season. And moving into column number 3. Starting with the Ottawa Senators, 2017-2018, all the optimism in the world coming out of that 2017 run that almost got them into the Stanley Cup final. They were 5th to start the season, and they were dead last, 31st by the end of the season. 2018, 2019, and beyond, it's ugly. So this might be just as ugly as Buffalo's, although they did go, almost to a final in 2017. So the pain hasn't lasted as long in Ottawa. But they start 26th. They end up 28th at the end of the 2018-2019 season. 2019-2020, they started dead last at 31st. They ended up 28th at the end of the season. 2020-2021, they start the season 23rd. They actually ended the season 15th. So some reason for optimism coming out of that season, but it doesn't last. 2021-2022, they start the season 20th on the board. They end up 23rd at the end of the season. 2022-2023, they start at 24th, and they end up 21st at the end of that season. The season we just finished, they started 18th on the board, and they ended up 24th at the end of it. So it has been a long while since we've seen Ottawa in the playoffs, and I'm sure Sens fans really hoping that long while ends with a playoff run this year. All right, Tampa Bay, their expansion brethren. 2017-2018, they started the season second on the board. They were 10th at the end of it. They did go to the conference final. 2018-2019, they started the season third on the board. They ended up first at the end of the board, at the end of the season with that great run, and then they got knocked out in the first round. 2019-2020, they started the season fifth on the board. They were eighth at the end of it. They won a Stanley Cup. 2020-2021, they start the season first on the board. They were 11th at the end of it. They won the Stanley Cup again. 2021-2022, they start the season seventh on the board. They're fourth at the end, and they go all the way to the final. So that's 2 cups and a final in 3 years. 2022-2023, they start the season 12th on the board. They're 16th at the end. Out in the first round. 2023-2024, they start the season 19th on the board. They're 7th at the end. They're out in the first round again. It'd be fascinating if I keep up power rankings for another, say, another 10 years. To look at, this huge, vast amount of information on just this fun, arbitrary ranking. Just thinking that as I'm going through this. Like, this would be really fun to have, like, a huge graph. Okay, I have different ideas of fun than other people. I get that. I understand. That's been the case. That's what set me up to be in a room by myself all day. So, at any rate, yes, let's move on to Toronto. So, Toronto... their playoff pain is different than some of the others. They made the playoffs every year on the board, but 2017-2018, they start the season third on the board. They were 11th at the end. They were out in the first round. 2018-2019, they started the season first on the board. They were 14th at the end, out in the first round. 2019-2020, they start the season 7th on the board. They end up 14th at the end, and they're out in the qualifying round. 2020-2021, they start the season 5th on the board. They're 3rd at the end of it, and round 1, they're out again. 2021-2022, they start the season 15th on the board. They're 3rd at the end of the season and out in the first round. 2022-2023, they start the season 7th on the board. They ended up 5th at the end of it, and they were out in the second round. And 2023-2024, they start the season 2nd on the board, and they're out in the first round after finishing 9th on the board at the end of the season. So it's interesting that Toronto has been in the top 10 either to start or finish every single season of these 7 years. But what we remember is being out early in the playoffs. And that's where being out early in the playoffs hurts, because you can have this great run, but without the playoff success, what people remember is you didn't have the playoff success more than anything else. The Carolina Hurricanes. So we're starting the final division now. 2017-2018, they started the season 21st. They ended up 20th at the end of it. 2018-2019, just after I'd written them off. 2018, I was like, I don't think Carolina's ever going to make the playoffs. And then they did. 2018-2019, they started the season 13th on the board. They were 7th at the end of it, and they went all the way to the conference final. 2019-2020, they start the season 12th on the board. They ended up 17th at the end, but they were a playoff team. They were out in the first round. 2020-2021, they started the season 12th on the board. They were 2nd at the end of it. They were out in the second round that year. 2021-2022, they start the season 3rd on the board. They're 9th at the end. They're out in the second round again. 2022-2023, they're 3rd on the board to start that season, 9th at the end of the season, and they go to the conference final again. In this past season, they started the season 3rd on the board. They were 1st going into the playoffs, but they were out in the second round again. So Carolina, very good regular season success. They finished the season top 10 for the last 5 years. They just have not been able to get over the hump and win a championship. And, questions are out there now about whether they ever will. It doesn't take that long before those questions start coming up. All right, Columbus. It's been a rough go for Columbus lately, but they did have some success at the start. So 2017-2018, they were 6th to start the season and 5th to finish the season, but they went out in the first round. 2018-2019, they started the season 14th. They ended up 11th at the end of the season. The huge knockout over Tampa, but they would go out in the second round. 2019-2020, they started the season 26th. They ended up 21st at the end of the season, and then they knocked out Toronto in the qualifying round before getting knocked out in the first round themselves. 2020-2021, this is where it gets kind of ugly. They start 21st. They end up 28th at the end of the season. 2021-2022, they started the season 25th. They ended the season 21st. 2022-2023, they start the season 29th. They ended up 31st at the end of the season. And this past season, they started 20th. They ended up 29th on the board when the season was done. So for Columbus, it's been a tough go for the last, 4 years? It's been 4 years. So, yeah, 4 years is a while. That's becoming increasingly the case, though. This is where, rebuilds and, my team should do a teardown. Keep that in mind, because those full teardowns, you're looking at well over a half a decade of your team probably being really mediocre. So, the New Jersey Devils, 2017-2018, they started the season 4th on the board. They ended up 7th at the end, but they lost in the first round that year. 2018-2019, I was gung-ho on them to start the season at 9th, and then they ended up 30th at the end of the season. 2019-2020, they started the season 19th on the board, and they ended the season 20th, so there's some synergy there. 2020-2021, they start the season 19th on the board. They ended up 26th at the end of the season. 2021-2022, they start the season 21st on the board, and they ended up 28th at the end of the season. 2022-2023, this huge run. They start the season 30th. They end up 7th at the end of the season. They lost in the second round. And this past year, it was kind of the opposite. They started the season 6th. They ended up 21st at the end of the season. But the expectations for New Jersey are high again this season. We'll see whether or not they live up to said expectations. Expectations can be tough, and New Jersey's navigating it, I think, pretty well so far, but we'll see if that continues. The Islanders, 2017-2018, they start the season 16th on the board. They ended up 24th at the end of it. Then some Tavares guy leaves, and there you go. 2018-2019, they start the season 23rd on the board. They were 8th at the end of the season. They lost in the second round that year. 2019-2020, they start the season 11th. At the time of the pause, they were 24th on the board, but they were ready for coming out of the pause. They go to the conference final coming out of that pause. 2020-2021, they start the season 9th on the board. They end up 14th at the end of it. The semifinal is as far as they got that season. So 2 years in a row, the Islanders in the Final Four. 2021-2022, they start the season 14th on the board. They ended up 20th at the end of it. 2022-2023, they started the season 19th on the board. They were 15th at the end of it, out the first round. And this past season, they started 14th, they ended 14th, and they were out in the first round. So yeah, the Islanders, I like that they started and finished in the same spot. That doesn't happen with a lot of them on the board, but it's kind of fun, the ones that didn't move that much from the start to the finish of the season. And so the New York Rangers are next up. The Rangers, of course, going through the retool they did. 2017-2018, they started 28th on the board. They ended up 29th. 2018-2019, they started the season 30th on the board. They were 29th at the end of the season. But 2019-2020, things get better. They go from 18th to start the season to 10th at the end of it. And then they get knocked out in the qualifying round by Carolina in 3 straight. 2020-2021, they started 25th on the board. They were 18th at the end of it. Playing in the Eastern Division did not help them. 2020-2021, they start the season 8th on the board. They were 8th at the end of the season, and they went all the way to the conference final. 2022-2023, they started the season 4th on the board. They were 6th at the end of it. They were out in the first round. 2023-2024, they started 8th on the board. They were 2nd at the end of the season, and they went all the way to the conference final this past year as well. So it's been a pretty good run for the Rangers, to be honest. And while I see that, they'll never win, they've only had 3 years in the playoffs. This is going to be their 4th in a row this year, I would think, unless something disastrous happens. But yeah, the Rangers are nowhere near some of these other teams on the board in terms of, their window's closing. I hear that every now and then with teams, and I'm like, how do people know whose window's closing and when? We've seen, how many times did the Red Wings just pry that window right back open and win another cup and then close it again? All right, The Philadelphia Flyers, 2017-2018, they started the season 12th on the board. They were 13th at the end, and they were out in the first round. 2018-2019, they started 22nd. They ended 23rd. So, very consistent. 2019-2020, they started the season 21st on the board. They were first at the time of the pause, and they went out in the second round. So, at the time of the pause, I really thought and still say Philadelphia was playing the best hockey. 2020-2021, they started the season 15th on the board. They were 21st at the end of it. 2021-2022, they started the season 16th. They ended up 32nd at the end of it. So I'm optimistic about Philly at the start of most seasons, it seems. Then 2022-2023, that optimism changes. They go from 20th to start the season to 24th at the end of it. And 2023-2024, they started the season 29th on the board, and they ended 23rd on the board. So not a fantastic run for Philly in recent years. They haven't been in the playoffs for, it's been 4 years now since they've been in the playoffs. So again, those rebuilds, they can take a while. You're looking at a lot of time not getting any playoff revenues for owners. Owners can get kind of cranky about not getting their revenues either. Pittsburgh. So we're almost to the end. We're close. I knew this was going to be over 40 minutes. Pittsburgh. 2017-2018, they started 11th on the board. They were 8th at the end of it. 2018-2019, they were 10th on the board to start and 6th at the end of it. Now in 2018, they lost in the second round. 2019, they lost in the first round, and they haven't won a round since that round win in 2018. 2019-2020, they start 17th on the board. They ended up 13th at the end. They lost in the qualifying round against Montreal that season. 2020-2021, they start 16th on the board. They were 4th at the end of the year. 2021-2022, they were 13th to start the year, 14th to finish it, and they were out in the first round. 2022-2023, they start the season 9th on the board. They were 19th at the end of it. And this past season, again, I started them 9th, and they ended up 17th at the end. So this season, I did not put Pittsburgh in the top 16. Back-to-back almost playoffs and missing playoffs caused me to be a little more conservative in my expectations when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins this season. And last but not least, the Washington Capitals. 2017-2018, they started the season 25th. I remember because coming out of the 2016-2017 season, they lost a lot of guys, but they started the season 25th. They ended up 3rd, and they won a Stanley Cup. So they just kept winning. 2018-2019, they start the season 6th on the board. They ended up 3rd at the end. They lost in the first round. So much like Pittsburgh, the Caps haven't won a round since 2018 either. 2019-2020, they start the season first on the board. They were 11th at the end. They lost in the first round. 2020-2021, they start the season 7th on the board. They were 9th at the end. They're out in the first round. 2021-2022, out in the first round. They started the season 6th. They ended up 13th at the end. 2022-2023, rough year for Washington. They start 22nd. They end 25th. This past season, they start 27th. They were 18th at the end of the year. They did make the playoffs, and they lost in the first round against the New York Rangers. So, fascinating to see how all this went down. The year that Vegas wins the Cup, they were 4th on the power rankings going in. For Tampa Bay's, they were 8th and 11th, respectively, when they won their Stanley Cups on the power rankings board. St. Louis was 5th the year that they won the Stanley Cup. The Capitals were 3rd the year they won the Stanley Cup going in. I think that's all of it except for Florida, who were 10th when they won the Stanley Cup this past year. So Florida gets into the playoffs and goes on a run late to win the division, and they conserved a little bit of energy that they didn't the 2021-2022 season when they won the President's Trophy and lost in the second round. So being first on the power rankings doesn't necessarily mean a ton come playoff time, but that's why I don't do power rankings come playoff time. Everything changes in the playoffs. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for watching. I did it in one take. I didn't even have to pause. All right. Thanks for your support. I will talk to you again soon.